Hey everyone, this is Allison from Thriving While Disabled. Talking to you today again from one of my spots. I want to talk today a bit about what's been going on the last few days with the peaceful protests and the occasional riots and looting that's been going on. To be clear, I fully support the protesters. I think they're responding appropriately to damage that has been dealt to Black people for a very long time. And while on some level treatment of Blacks by whites has improved, it's still a very, very broken system. Here in the US, we have a lot of forms of systematized racism that's just baked into everything in the world around us. And the police are one powerful example. As a disabled person, I think it's important to speak up and be an ally. There are a large percentage of disabled people who are Black, and a disproportionate number of Black people are dealing with disabilities. And why are a disproportionate number of Black people dealing with disabilities? Well, because of systemic bias in the medical system. What do I mean? Well, first of all, it's often more difficult for Black people to get insurance and be able to afford insurance because many are poor. But on top of that, they found that computer systems within a lot of healthcare systems, when recommendations are given for Black people or treatment options are confirmed or requests for medications are considered, the systems do much better in finding good health outcomes for white people than Black, and are more apt to support requests for white people than Black. It's pretty broken. Also, there's a lot of bias, and people in emergency rooms and other doctors still at least subconsciously believe some of the old, false narratives that are out there, such as that Black people feel less pain, or that, Black people are more dangerous, or things like that. And if you ask someone, they'll say, of course I don't believe that. But think about it this way. Emergency rooms are full of people needing to make last-minute decisions and needing to think quickly and make judgment calls. And unfortunately, those judgment calls can't take everything into account and do rely to some extent on instinct. And some of that is instinct gained from personal experience, and some of it is just, their own cultural biases. And the problem is people aren't used to recognizing their own biases, aren't trained to see them and deconstruct them. And in all honesty, disabled people deal with the same issue. Right now with COVID-19, Black people are dying from COVID-19 and getting COVID-19, having worse health outcomes, all of it. And they're getting infected at over 3 times the rate of white people. And they're not getting treated as well, both because it's harder for them to get into the hospital and get treatment, but even once they're there, they're more likely to get, put back. They're more likely to have treatment delayed. They're more likely, you see what I mean? It builds up. And everybody has bias. Bias is just part of how humans work. The problem is so many of us have been taught biases, have picked up biases. It's not even taught necessarily. It's about what we see on TV, what we hear from other people, what we experience. But all of it together has led to this negative association with Black people, and honestly, a negative association with people with disabilities. With disabilities, we may be an object of pity, but we're less likely to be viewed as important, as significant as, a plain old able-bodied person. And one of the big problems that people with disabilities have been facing with the COVID crisis has been that our medical care has been deprioritized. And that's true whether we have COVID or whether it's simply, we have another medical need. Nurses doing triage have biases, and because of those unconscious biases, they're more apt to put disabled people and Blacks and other minorities further back on their priority list. And that's really scary. That's really sad. But that's just a fact of how this world works. And so the protests that are happening is a response to too many Black people dying because of these biases and nothing being done to manage them, to recognize them, to treat them. And for the most part, the Black people are still being blamed unless you've got uncontrovertible proof, such as in this case, that no, the Black person didn't do anything. And then they become a victim of the police, which is true. But also being placed in the victim role is not very healthy. And so Black people are tired of dying. And I can't blame anybody for being tired of seeing people who look like them and sound like them and are like them dying unnecessarily, inappropriately, being killed. So I'm asking everybody who watches me, everybody who's part of this, to think about times that you've experienced bias or discrimination, or have been intentionally or unintentionally behind some form of bias or discrimination, and really reflect on that. I'm going to put a link in here to a test that I participated in the other day, which helps look at your unconscious biases. I took the racial bias test, and it showed that I do have a slight preference towards whites and slight bias towards whites, and that makes sense. I am white, and the social media everywhere reinforces that bias towards whites. Think about how often you see Black people on TV, in the news, things like that. Unfortunately, a large percentage of the time, they're in the news because of crime. White people are in the news for a lot more reasons, including, being in respected leadership positions, including because of something good they've done. And I'm not saying Black people never are. I mean, we had a Black president. But other than Obama, think about how Black people have been portrayed in the news. And then think about how white people have been portrayed in the news. And that goes for most other identities too. How are disabled people presented in the news? How are Latina and Latino people, Latinx people presented in the news? There is bias, and it is very, very deep-seated in this country. And the police force is especially guilty of this bias. And the police force is in a position of extreme power to enact this bias in deadly ways. There does need to be reform in the police. There should be reform in most of our systems, because Black people aren't being treated fairly. A lot of people aren't being treated fairly. And so I want everybody, when you watch this, to think about times you have not been treated fairly, and times where, if you're in any kind of position of privilege where something you said or did put another person in a bad position because of bias. My story about unintentionally using privilege is one day when I went to see my therapist, I put my coat, which had my wallet in it, and I hung it up in his office instead of bringing it into the room with me. And I could have sworn I had 20 in the wallet. I was going to get together with a friend later, and I, had cash. And I was pretty sure that I did that. I was, in my head I had it. I knew I had it. And after my appointment, I stepped out and put on my coat. And the next patient for his was there, and she happened to be a Black woman. I didn't really pay any particular attention to it. I just, I remember it. And I walked out, and I went up and met up with a friend. We sat down, had dinner, had lunch together. And when we finished eating, I reached into my wallet, and there wasn't any money there. And so I was like, did I have it? Am I sure I had it? I really thought I had money in there. And and we looked around where we were, wasn't there. I basically had gone from his office, directly to meet up with her. I didn't think there was anywhere else I'd taken my wallet out or I'd done anything. And so I was really perplexed. I ended up calling my therapist, just because sometimes I'll put the money in the wrong pocket, or, I'll put it next to my wallet and it falls out, stuff like that. And so I called his office, and I just left a message with him asking if he'd seen a 20 around, because I thought I had it in my wallet, and I, didn't have it now. And he called me back a little while later, and he said, no, Allison, there wasn't any money there. And he's like, so I talked to the patient after you, and she swears she didn't pick anything up, but, I believe you, and so I'm not going to see her again. And I didn't say anything, and I should have, but if that woman said she didn't take it, I believe her. I mean, she was in a no-win situation there. As soon as he asked that question, there was nothing she could have said that would have let her have a therapeutic relationship. Nothing. If she said, oh, I did take it, I'm so sorry. Oh, well, then you're a thief, so why would I work with you? If she, as she did, protested, then he decided to believe me over her, and so she was a liar, and so why would he treat somebody who lied to him? Honesty is the bedrock of a good therapeutic relationship. So, again, I'm not somebody who normally loses money. I do occasionally, but, I don't know. The honest answer is it's possible, but not likely that I dropped it somewhere else. It's possible, but not likely that I spent it and forgot. It's possible. All kinds of things are possible. I don't know. I wouldn't have said specifically, she took my money, because I don't know. But he interpreted what I said that way, accused the woman, and stopped seeing her. She was punished for what might have just been, you know, me having a flaky moment. And I didn't say anything. I feel kind of guilty about that. Not hugely, it doesn't like eat away at me all the time, but if I step back and think about her situation, I don't know how hard she had to work to try to get that appointment. I don't know, you know, how many people she'd seen prior to that. I don't, you know. But being disbelieved is tough. And I wouldn't want that on anybody, especially not with something as uncertain as where I was. And I think it's really unfortunate that she was not given the benefit of the doubt. And I feel bad about the part that I played in it. Though, again, I didn't do anything intentionally, and that wasn't the result I was looking for. I was just hoping that, you know, he'd seen the dropped money and held on to it. But I just want to bring home the point to people that we do participate in racism, ableism, bias, all of that. Whether we mean to or not, whether it's intentional or not. And so when you're looking at the riots, when you're looking at the protests, when you're seeing what's going on in this country, remember that they are protesting for good reason and with good reason. And they deserve to be heard. They deserve to be respected. And systemic change in this country is long overdue. And will not just benefit Black people, it will benefit all of the disempowered and minority identities, including people with disabilities and the disabled community. All right. Take care, everybody. I will talk to you again soon. And until then, keep thriving.